Marcus Dibb, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're the offensive tranny on YouTube. What's the story behind that name?
Oh, so I wanted to catch people's attention when I first started making some political posts on Instagram, and there's this guy called Slightly Offensive from the US, and then I'm like, well, I'm a tranny, so why not play with these names? And I combined them, and it kind of stuck with me. And also some people feel uncomfortable because of the name, and some people love it. So I'm like, oh, that's perfect.
Well, you're only allowed to do it because you're trans, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the trans privilege.
Yes, trans privilege. Well, speaking of that, you identify as transsexual and not transgender, like most people today, or at least in my sphere. Can you tell me why that is?
Yeah, sure. So transsexual is the old-fashioned term. I guess everyone recognized that as an old-fashioned term. And it's on purpose that I call myself transsexual because I want to make it very clear that I have nothing to do with trans ideology and the trans community today, as it is today. And unfortunately, transgender now is an umbrella term and means all sorts of things that has nothing to do with gender dysphoria and the medical transition. Now, anyone can be trans, and it also includes labels as non-binary, which is not a real thing. People who think that they're in the middle of gender. So it's such an ideological term that it has pushed me into identifying as like the old-fashioned term.
Yeah, and you also sort of outwardly state on your social media that you're a biological woman living as a man. Is that's sort of the same idea?
Yes, yes, that's a good point because the trans ideology rejects biology and common sense because transsexual people have always existed and they have never, until now, um, rejected their own biology and the biological truth behind being a trans person. So I like to make it very clear what my situation is. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm a real man, or I'm the same as a biological male, but that's what the trans community is doing. That's what trans ideology is. They're erasing actually the definition of transsexualism by saying trans women are women and trans men are men, and that's what I'm, against.
Yeah, can we elaborate on this term, transgender ideology? You've said it doesn't have anything to do with being transsexual. Are you able to sort of elaborate and explain that a bit more?
So LGBT has always existed, and the people who are LGBT, but we're now seeing a plus and sometimes a Q, sometimes a QIA plus, and it's hard to keep up. And the QIA plus represents gender ideology. And what is gender ideology? Well, it is the theory that there are more than two genders, that children can consent to like a physical gender transition, that it's okay for men to compete in women's sports. So it's all the hot button topics that we see today. That represents gender ideology, and that's the QIA plus that has recently been added on to the LGBT. So I like to say that QIA plus has nothing to do with LGBT, for that reason.
Yeah, it seems like some of these identities are political, if anything. Like they're purely used for political posturing or as a political identity rather than anything sort of real.
Oh, 100%. You don't really see any right-wing non-binaries or people who are in this community who's like pro-Trump or any famous right-wing politician. You don't really see that because it is a political movement. And that's also why I say that the QI plus has nothing to do with LGBT, because LGBT is biological. being a gay person, a bisexual, or a trans person is due to biology. It's a part of nature in a way. So, but the ideology, the whole theory that there are more than two genders, that's a political statement. And the thing about the children, political. So yeah.
That's really a really interesting point you made. There's no non-binary conservatives. I'm just trying to think because there are like lesbian, gay conservatives. There are transsexual conservatives. Yeah, there's no non-binary conservatives.
Maybe you'll find one, but it doesn't really count.
So what would you say? It's like a left wing political ideology. Is that what you're saying?
I actually don't want to. I actually don't want to say that either because I think it's a party in itself in a way. It's like I would say it's a woke thing. Wokeness to me is like a far left thing. And I would also say it has nothing to do with the left. I think a lot of left-wing people, to some degree, agree with wokeness because they feel like they have to, but I don't think they truly believe in it. Also, because I think wokeness is kind of evil, because it's very anti-LGBT, it's very anti-women, and anti non-white people. So I don't think it has anything to do with being a left-wing person, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, there's a difference.
It's radical, is what I'm trying to
say. Yeah, it's extreme. There's a difference between being a leftist and a liberal, right? Like, interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when did you kind of notice all this? Yeah, this uptake in what you're saying, gender ideology.
Oof, I don't really know exactly when, but it's funny because I used to believe in some of the stuff I criticize today. When I first found out that I was trans, I kind of listened to the community, the same community that hates me today, ironically. And that's because that was the only information there was back then. So this was in 2016, I think. I used to believe in it. I used to believe that it was cruel that trans people have to seek help at this clinic. And it was cruel that gatekeeping existed, like that you have to prove that you're trans in a way before changing your life permanently. And yeah, I used to believe in all crazy things, that there are more than two genders and stuff. But I quickly realized how these people are just miserable, and they want to be miserable, most importantly. And I also noticed how do you know when you like, sometimes you can notice how something is political, and not factual, that this is because they have certain political opinions, but they don't believe in the facts, or they don't want to listen to the facts. They just want to listen to themselves. So that's when I realized, and that was, I mean, very a couple of months after I was introduced to the community, I realized this is not right.
Can we go into your gender transition? So at what age did you transition or realize you were trans or experience gender dysphoria? What was that process like for you?
Right. Yeah, because you can divide it into multiple categories, I guess. There's like you discovering, or not you, but I discovered that I was trans, I socially transitioned, and then I medically transitioned. So yeah, there are some steps for sure. I've always had a big lack of inner peace. Like my entire childhood, I was not the most happy child, and I didn't know why. I've always been very feminine, and I am very feminine, which I totally own today. But it was difficult to find out why I was not completely happy. And when I was about 15, 16, I slowly figured out it has something to do with my gender and how people viewed me and what people called me. And it was a very, very long process. And eventually, when I was 15 or 16, I was like, maybe I'm this thing called a trans guy. And if it's not me, or if this is what if what I'm experiencing is not this, I can always go back and do some more soul searching, I guess. But I never look back, and apparently it was the right thing for me. And I was in the closet for over a year. And, I told my friends a couple of months after and stuff, but I really, my process was really slow compared to other transsexuals. I also, so of course I socially transitioned to begin with. I changed my wardrobe. I changed my hair. People called me different things, but I started my physical transition when I was 20. So about 3 to 4 years, I didn't do anything physically or permanently. So yeah, I was 20, which was 4 years ago. I started my physical transition.
I was going to ask, yeah, because you advocate against puberty blockers for minors, but I'm interested in how that corresponds, with the fact that you were able to undergo transition, but you didn't transition till you were 20. Did you take like puberty blockers before that?
No, I didn't. I think puberty blockers is mostly for boys because testosterone is so powerful. I didn't need to take any puberty blockers. Like I've had estrogen in my body for 20, not 20 years, but until I was 20. And then I received testosterone, and then I look and sound like this. It's a very powerful hormone. So girls don't really need it as much. If we're talking about the technical things.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I've been through all this, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to transition, and therefore I know that this is not something that we can do to children. And I'm also so scared, even though I'm happy. I'm super happy with who I am today and what I've done to myself. I'm just so scared of the thought that I've done this to myself at age 16 when I found out I was trans. Like, I was not mature enough at all. I think everyone can relate. There's a big difference between who you were when you were 16 and then 18 and also 20 and so on. But yeah, children are not, first of all, children cannot consent in general, but they do not know what they're receiving when, if they're receiving these drugs. And I know this because I've done it myself, more or less.
How has it helped you? Can you elaborate on, like, since you've transitioned, you said you're a lot happier.
Yeah, it's a good question because it actually doesn't make sense when you think about it. Like, I'm going against my biology and what I'm supposed to be. But for some reason, I have never been happier. The lack of inner peace is totally gone. I am at peace with myself. And yeah, it's like the mental fog is gone in a way. And oh yeah, well, the reason is what I've been struggling with is a mental disorder called gender dysphoria. And when curing a mental disorder, you feel better mentally, of course. So I think that explains it all in a way.
I don't have much understanding with what's happening with young people and puberty blockers. Like, there seems to be like a movement of, yeah, more conservative trans people. Like, well, I wouldn't say conservative, maybe just countering this narrative. Like yourself and Buck Angel. There also seems to be like a detransitioner movement. And then you've got the feminist movement critical of it. And then you've got the conservative Christian men, which is just like insane. Like, all these different groups are kind of railing against puberty blockers for minors. So I just want to understand a little bit more about what is happening there.
Yeah, that's true. We see a lot of groups of people being against the same thing, but for different reasons. We see a lot of religious Christians and religious Muslims being against it, and I think we all know why. We see trans people being against doing this to children because they know what it's like to go through it themselves. and with the women, and I don't like to use this word at all, but it's the TERFs we're talking about. And that's because they feel like their rights are under attack, which they are, the rights. So yeah, different people have a different reason to be against the same things. It's actually really interesting. And I also see leftists being against this. So that's also it's a small group who are outspoken about being a leftist and against these things, but they do exist. Of course they do. Why is it I don't know why it's happening, honestly. I think people have had enough. I think what all these groups of people have in common is that they've had enough, right? Um, the laws were changing, and for some reason we were all forced to believe in gender ideology, and I would say the majority of people are just not comfortable with that. So
What's the
yeah.
concern for you for the detransitioners? It seems to be yeah, like transition regret. But I just think it's really interesting because yeah, you needed to transition, right? But some people must see you as a gatekeeper, right? Yeah,
Hmm. Right.
what's behind you, like your motivation to advocate against like puberty blockers for kids?
Right. Yes, that is to prevent detrans stories from happening because we see a huge rise in detransitioners, and it's very concerning. So I'm doing, and I'm also, uh, I don't know how to say it, but like I also stand with the detrans community, even though I am the opposite of them in a way. But I support them 100%. They're amazing people, a lot of them, and I support them. So um, because I talk to a lot of detransitioners, I, I can I can sense it's very painful. And most detransitioners transition when they were kids. Um, so there must be a pattern here, and I'm a proud gatekeeper. I would say, like I am proudly advocating for it to be more difficult to receive medical transitions. I think it should be as hard as possible, actually. I also wished that it was hard for me to get the transition. It wasn't, um, because I would be no, I won't say it like that. I would be gender dysphoric no matter what, no matter how many questions I got, no matter how critical they were of me, I would still be the same person I am today or feel what I'm feeling today. So I am a proud gatekeeper, and I think we should protect children's rights. And the reason why I'm speaking out is because most trans people on the internet are apparently for doing this to the children. So I want to be a different voice out there.
What is the appropriate response for kids who believe they're the opposite sex or the opposite gender? In your view, what's the appropriate response?
It depends on what the child. It depends. It's an individual assessment, in my opinion. First thing is to remove TikTok on the children's phones. I think that should be like a general rule. I think it's very unhealthy for these children to be on TikTok because you see so many trans influencers and celebrities glamorizing this transition when it's not that glamorous. That's one thing. If a kid is truly struggling, some kids are. I was maybe one of them, Blair and Buck. Let them be like, or let us be. Let the kids be gender non-conforming or whatever you call it. And I'm not actually for a social transition for like very young kids because the problem is if a like a 3 or 5 year old is like a boy, let's say, wants to be a girl, and you affirm that boy as a girl from that age, he will get used to it and he will forget that he's actually a boy. So I think that's very dangerous. That's what we saw with Jazz Jennings, who was a male to female trans person who was affirmed as a girl since the age of 2, because Jazz wanted to wear dresses as a boy. So I think that's very harmful. and sick. But if we're talking about a 13-year-old or like a 16-year-old, of course, a social transition is very safe and the best thing to handle the situation.
What's happening with Jazz Jennings? Is she, that's a he to a she, right? Or the other way around?
I just say she because it's easier. Yeah. Because she looks like a woman. And so Jazz Jennings was the most famous trans kid case in the world. And Jazz is a biological male. And I am sure that the mom is like truly mentally disturbed, actually, because the mom was crying. It's so sick. The mom was crying and writing in a journal that her little boy wants to wear dresses. Like she was upset about that fact. So they took Jazz as I think Jazz was like 3, 4, or 5. I can't remember. I'm sorry, but they took the child to a gender specialist, and got Jazz diagnosed with gender dysphoria so early on. And from that moment, Jazz was socialized as a girl and as like a trans kid. And then when Jazz was 17, Jazz got like 4 bottom surgeries. And after the surgeries, Jazz is still miserable. Like there are clips of her where she's like, I never feel like myself. She's super obese now, like after her transition. So I think it's a very, very heartbreaking story.
How do we know like who's going to benefit from like transition and who's not? Like who is just a gender non-conforming person? Because I read these stories and like articles and stuff of parents saying or kids saying to the parents, "Oh, I always knew I was a boy because I liked playing in the mud." And I'm like, "Same, bro." Or I always knew I was a girl because I liked playing, I don't know, wearing dresses. And I'm just like, those are stereotypes that our society got
Yeah.
rid of. Like, I think maybe women have more freedom than men in that respect. Like, girls can wear pants or wear dudes' clothes and they're a bit more accepted. But if dudes wear like a dress and stuff, they maybe get shunned. But yeah, it's really interesting.
I think when it comes to the kids, no kid is going to benefit from a medical transition, the medical part, because no matter how the child is truly feeling, and no matter what the child will feel when they're an adult, putting puberty blockers into a child would most likely sterilize them for life and give them osteoporosis. The list is really long, actually, and um, just because the child will end up being a happy trans person, or you will find out that the child actually deals with chronic gender dysphoria, then they can't get pregnant. The boys will have a micro penis for the rest of their lives. Um, and it's like so depressing that people can advocate for this. And that's why I say that wokeness is evil. I don't think that everyone who believes that this is good for children are evil, but I believe that the people really advocating for it, and especially the medical professionals who actually know better, I think that there's some evil motivating them. So no child will benefit from the medical part. But I mean, when it comes to adults, that's a different story. I would say if an adult wants to transition, take a look at that. If they have any other mental disorders, if they had any trauma in their childhoods, especially physical and sexual trauma, and if an adult is like me, I don't have any trauma, I don't have any other major mental health issues, maybe they would benefit. They would most likely benefit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. But the idea of doing it early but the argument goes, so the kid doesn't go through the quote unquote wrong puberty. Right? Like what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that argument?
Oh, I hate it. I hate it so much because a kid going through their own like natal puberty will never be considered the wrong puberty. It's just not, that's factually incorrect. And it's disgusting to me that adults are saying that about kids. Oh, I don't want the boy to go through the wrong puberty. What do you mean? She's a girl, so a female puberty is not the wrong puberty. I think there's something so disgusting. I don't even know how to explain it, but like it's an ideological argument. It's not a factual argument. But no matter what, do you really want that girl, no matter if she will end up living her life as a man or not, do you want her to be sterile? Do you want her to stop her psychological development? Do you want her to get osteoporosis as a 20-year-old? Do you think that's fair?
I don't know. I'm just asking the questions, but yeah, I suppose it seems like then if the kid is like trans and then they go through puberty, it's kind of too late to not too late to transition, but it's maybe more difficult. I'm just trying to think of the arguments that they would make.
No, of course it is. No, I get it. I get the argument. Yeah. I totally get the argument. I'm super lucky that I could put into words what I've been feeling my entire life after puberty, because I can only imagine how painful it is to know, and then you're going through your natal puberty. I think that's very painful, but I think it's of course worth it to go through your natal puberty and to wait as long as you can. Like, I was 20. I waited 3 to 4 years before I started doing anything physically. But if I could wait like a couple of years more, that would be even better. Like, I'm not saying you have to be like 70, like Caitlyn Jenner, but you can. You have to be strong, and you have to listen to yourself and what you're feeling. Because how would kids be sure that they're trans if they've never? They can be more sure that they're trans if they go through that gender dysphoria, if they go through that pain, if you know what I mean. Like, we can't coddle these kids because it makes them even more insecure about their decisions. Or when making the decision now.
So for you, you're definitely glad that you didn't transition before puberty.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. Let's move on to, okay, so there's a backlash, right? There's a backlash against the gender ideology or the T's, right? Like people have merged trans and transsexual. It's just T, right? LGBT. And there's a movement that's like snip the T. So LGB without the T. Like, what are your thoughts on that movement?
Yeah, I sympathize a lot with them. I agree with maybe 80 to 90% of what they're saying, but I do not, and I will never agree that we should kick the T out of LGBT. Because the reason why the T was added on originally was because trans people used to identify as gay or lesbians or bisexual, and so they've been a part of the LGBT community for many years. Bug Angel is a good example. He was living as a lesbian for 30 years. So that's a very common story, actually. So it made sense that they were a community. And I think what we should do is to kick off the plus, the QIA plus. And and we should we should remind people what it actually means to be the T, because it is the fake perception of what it means to be trans that's the problem. That, again, fake trans people and fake transsexualism is the main problem. That's the ideology that's advocating for harming kids and women. So if we can get rid of that as a community, I don't think there would be a lot of problems.
Can I just ask, when you say, I'm not sure if you said this before, but when you say fake trans people, who do you mean?
Yeah, I mean the people who are claiming to be trans. It's to give a good example is the the young women with the green hair and the giant septum piercing, preaching about communism and being pro Antifa and stuff, that's a fake trans person. It is men and women who are struggling a lot with their mental health, and they think that they're trans, but they're not. They are politically motivated to transition, and yeah, to them it's a political statement. Being a real transsexual, you can be a leftist, you can be a right-wing person. It doesn't matter because it's a medical condition, so it can affect anyone. Where being a fake trans person, it's the same type of person.
And that brings me on
So,
to
yeah.
non-binary, because non-binary, like I can relate to that, the concept, right? Like gender non-conformity, and some people use them interchangeably. Like you're gender non-conforming / non-binary, and I'm like, gender non-conformity is saying it's a variation of your biological sex, right? We're not denying it. Like I'm a gender non-conforming woman. But non-binary people will say I'm not a woman. I am just gender non-conforming. Yeah, well, I mean, you've explained a little bit of your perspective, but yeah, what are your thoughts on the whole non-binary thing? And do you feel it diminishes being trans?
Oh, of course. I wish non-binary was a real thing, because then I could just be a part of that group and not change my entire life and kind of go against my biology and yeah, change who I am in a way. So I wish it was that simple, but it's not. It's not a real thing. And if non-binary was a real thing, then I think every single human being is non-binary, especially in the Western world where we're not as traditional. So like if a woman is not a stay-at-home housewife, is she non-binary? If she has a blazer on, is a CEO, is she non-binary? Because it goes against gender stereotypes. Like what? So I absolutely hate that term, and I think it's very offensive. And it's mostly people like women with short hair and men with long hair. And these people are implying that you cannot be a real woman with short hair, being a CEO, more or less, because that makes you a third gender. I think it's super offensive.
And it also seems to be a little bit counterintuitive to what it's trying to do. It's trying to say we don't want to fit into this limiting box, and that's creating another box. Oh man, I suppose the thing with me is, I wouldn't even be talking to you if this was like 2 years ago, eh? Because I was just like, I'm an artist, so I'm scared of but it's very in the arts world, it's very normal to just go along with all the stuff, and if you question it, you're in fear of being excommunicated from the group, which is what happened to J.K. Rowling, right? So that sort of set the precedent for, oh my God, we can't speak up about this. I think the only thing that grates me is the pronoun thing. I don't know, I just don't like it when, I mean, I said this earlier to another friend, like some of them are really lovely. Like honestly, like some people that use they them pronouns are like fairies that just sort of go to bush doofs and festivals, and like they're just beautiful people. But then some of them are just like they weaponize it against you, and they use my pronouns or else, and it's just like, oh my God, like it makes me feel like I'm kind of walking on eggshells around people, and it also it grates me a little bit to be asked what my pronouns are, because it's like kind of makes me feel a little bit like less of a woman. Like, what do you mean I'm a woman? Like, what the heck?
Yeah. Wow. That's so offensive that people ask you. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I think it's really cool that you're speaking out. You're doing great.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so I mean, what would you say to someone like that, just, say someone's being asked their pronouns and they want to be polite, but they don't want to be subjugated by this stuff. How do you respond appropriately? I'm still trying to work it out. What do you think?
Oh, if you're being asked, for example?
Yeah.
So I have a friend here who's a lesbian, and she has short hair. She's a little bit masculine, but not that much. And she has a lot of people have asked her, and she's really tired of this whole thing. And what she's doing is saying, um, if she's in a like a LGBT bar or something, she's like, "I'm a lesbian. I'm a lesbian." No, but what are your pronouns? Actually, she experienced once that that there was this woman who kept asking her. She wasn't satisfied with the answer. Like, no, but what are your pronouns? I'm a lesbian. I'm a lesbian. Like she kept saying, it was so fun, and I think that's brilliant because only women can be lesbians.
Well, some might beg to differ. I think, well, I've tried to just go, I'm a woman. And then I've had a response of like, that's not what I asked you. And I'm like, then I've just had to say, oh, I don't do the pronoun thing. But then you're just seen as like, I don't know, an outcast or someone who hates people or is unkind. It's like, no, I don't know, man. It seems religious to me. Yeah. Maybe I'll cut this bit out.
Yeah, just say you're not religious.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't do that. I'm not religious.
But I want to give people the benefit of the doubt or offer them a concession, but it's a line I'm trying to work out. Okay, so let's finish up with this. Okay, so if someone has a kid, young kid, comes to them and says, hey, I think I'm the opposite gender, how should they respond?
I think parents should be critical but loving. Like it's a balance. Because you can be honest and critical of something while still be very loving and tolerant and supportive. So that's something that the trans community doesn't understand. They think that being critical of this ideology means that you're hateful and you hate people, but it's not true. And of course, you can't talk to a 5-year-old about that. I'm just saying, show your kid love like you would naturally, and then be like, no, you're not a girl. You're my son. You're a boy, or whatever the case might be. Because children, they thrive on their parents' affirmation and validation. So if their parents are like, yes, you're a beautiful tall tree, they're like, oh, I identify as a tree. Like that's how kids are. They don't know any better. So I think, and if they're struggling, like where you can tell they're getting older and struggle, send them to a non-ideological therapist, and again, love them, support them, but you're not supporting them by medicalizing them for life. That's not the right thing to do. Never the right thing to do. And if they say, well, if I can't transition, I will off myself, it's most likely, and I can say this with confidence, it's most likely never going to happen. It's all talk, and it's because they're if that's the case, the child is maybe becoming a teenager, it's most likely coming from the trans community. They're all reading from the same script. So it's an, do you call it an empty threat in English? I'm not sure. But it's blackmail. It's emotional blackmail. And you cannot, even though it's hard as a parent, don't listen to it. Don't believe in it. And if you're too scared of not believing in it, send them to a therapist. Again, someone who's not ideological at all. That's my advice.
And wait until you're an adult to decide.
The later, the better.
Oh, all right, man. Hey, it's been really cool to talk to you. Where can people find you? Find your work?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So you can find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Rumble, and if you just type Marcus Deeb, D-I-B, you'll probably find me.
Or the offensive tranny.
Yes.
Cool, man. It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.